Captain Rachel Stewart stared at the water stain on the ceiling tiles above General Howard's desk, counting each brown mark while his voice droned through the litany of her supposed failures. 17 stains. She'd memorized every one during the past hour of this disciplinary hearing at Kandahar Airfield. Your actions during Operation Sandstorm violated direct orders, endangered civilian aircraft, and cost taxpayers approximately $4 million in ordnance, General David Howard said, his weathered face bearing the expression of a man who'd buried too many good pilots. His thick fingers shuffled through papers like he was dealing cards for her career's funeral. Rachel kept her eyes fixed on stain number 18, a new one she'd just noticed. It reminded her of the blood pooling beneath Corpsman Tony Martinez when she'd pulled him from that burning Humvee 2 weeks ago. The same Humvee that Command had written off as acceptable losses until she disobeyed orders and provided close air support. The sterile conference room felt like a tomb. Her flight suit still carried the smell of jet fuel and cordite from what would apparently be her last authorized mission for months. Outside the reinforced windows, she could hear the familiar sound of aircraft engines spooling up for the days. Operations she wouldn't be part of. Do you have anything to say for yourself? General Howard's question hung in the recycled air like smoke from a distant fire. Rachel finally met his gaze. Her green eyes held no apology, no regret, just the steady resolve of someone who'd sleep well knowing 6 Marines went home to their families instead of body bags. Sir, I'd do it again. The general's jaw tightened. He'd expected contrition, maybe some political maneuvering to save her career. Instead, he got the same stubborn honesty that made Rachel Stewart the best close air support pilot in theater and the biggest headache for anyone trying to manage her. Captain Stewart, you're grounded pending full review. His voice carried the finality of a death sentence. Your access codes are revoked. Your aircraft is off limits, and you'll report to base administration for reassignment. He closed the folder with a decisive snap that echoed like a gunshot. Dismissed. Rachel stood, her boots clicking against the polished floor as she executed a perfect salute. Each step toward the door felt measured and deliberate, like walking to her own execution. Behind her, she heard Howard's aide whisper something about paperwork and regulations. She didn't look back. The corridor outside seemed longer than usual, fluorescent lights humming overhead like angry insects. Other officers passed without making eye contact. Word traveled fast on a military base, and nobody wanted to associate with a pilot who'd just been cashiered for insubordination. As she pushed through the heavy doors leading outside, the Afghan heat hit her like a physical blow. The mountains surrounding Kandahar Airfield shimmered in the afternoon haze, their peaks hiding valleys where American forces patrolled daily, facing ambushes and IEDs with minimal air support, because pilots like her were being grounded for doing their jobs. Rachel walked toward Hangar Foxtrot, knowing that seeing her aircraft one last time would hurt, but unable to stay away. The A-10 Thunderbolt had been her partner for 3 deployments, scarred and patched, but always reliable. Now it would probably be stripped for parts or shipped stateside for some desk pilot who'd never push it to its limits. The injustice burned in her chest like acid. While bureaucrats in air-conditioned offices worried about regulations and taxpayer dollars, American soldiers were dying in those mountains. She'd violated orders to save lives, and her reward was career suicide. But as she approached the hangar, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Something about Howard's reaction, the way his aide had avoided eye contact, the speed with which her grounding had been processed, it all felt orchestrated. Like someone had been waiting for an excuse to sideline her. The question was why? Hangar. Foxtrot buzzed with controlled chaos that defined military aviation maintenance. Rachel pushed through the heavy doors into the familiar smell of hydraulic fluid, metal polish, and jet fuel. Her A-10 Thunderbolt, tail number 7-8-7-2-4, sat in the center bay like a caged predator. The aircraft's distinctive twin engines and massive cannon gave it an almost prehistoric appearance, as if someone had crossed a shark with a pterodactyl and taught it to fly. Bullet holes dotted the fuselage like metallic acme, each one telling the story of missions where coming home intact counted as victory. Sergeant Lisa Griffin looked up from a fuel pump diagnostic, her grease-stained coveralls and no-nonsense expression marking her as someone who'd forgotten more about aircraft maintenance than most colonels ever learned. She'd been keeping warbirds airworthy since before Rachel graduated high school. "I heard about your meeting with the brass," Griffin sighed, not bothering with pleasantries. "Figured you'd show up here eventually." Rachel ran her hand along the A-10's scarred fuselage, feeling the patches where aluminum plates covered larger holes. "They grounding her too?" Griffin snorted. "Bird doesn't have rank, Captain. Can't court-martial an airplane." She wiped her hands on a shop rag that had seen better decades. But they did pull her from the active roster, scheduled for depot maintenance, probably ship her stateside for complete overhaul. The words hit Rachel like physical blows. In military speak, depot maintenance often meant an aircraft would be stripped for parts and scrapped. Her Thunderbolt had flown too many impossible missions, taken too much damage, pushed too far beyond design specifications. Chief Warrant Officer Raymond Butler emerged from beneath the aircraft's port engine, his bald head shining under the hangar's fluorescent lights. Butler had the kind of mechanical intuition that bordered on supernatural. Give him a broken aircraft and a box of spare parts, and he'd find a way to make it fly. "Captain," he nodded respectfully, "been giving your bird a complete once-over. She's got more patches than a quilt, but the bones are solid. Engines run smooth, hydraulics hold pressure, flight controls respond clean." He paused, studying Rachel's expression. "She wants to fly again." Rachel knew Butler wasn't just talking about mechanical readiness. Aircraft develop personalities after enough combat missions, especially A-10s. They became partners rather than machines, developing quirks and characteristics their pilots learned to read like body language. "Any word on replacement assignment?" Griffin asked. Rachel shook her head. "Probably end up pushing papers in some Pentagon basement, analyzing combat effectiveness reports for aircraft I'll never fly again." The hangar's main doors rumbled open, admitting a convoy of dust-covered vehicles returning from patrol. Through the gap, Rachel could see the mountains that surrounded Kandahar Airfield, their peaks disappearing into afternoon haze. Somewhere in those mountains, enemy forces were planning their next attack, laying ambushes for American patrols, moving weapons and fighters through terrain that hadn't changed much since Alexander the Great marched through 2,000 years ago. "Captain Stewart, report to the communications center immediately." The voice echoed through the hangar's public address system, cutting through ambient noise of maintenance work and engine tests. Rachel exchanged glances with Griffin and Butler. Emergency communications usually meant something had gone wrong. And in Afghanistan, wrong had a way of escalating quickly. The walk to the communications center felt ominous. Other personnel she passed seemed to avoid eye contact, and she caught whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Word of her grounding had spread through the base like wildfire, and now she was marked as someone whose career was effectively over. But there was something else in the way people looked at her, not just pity or professional distance, but something that looked almost like fear, as if her presence might contaminate them with whatever bureaucratic disease had infected her military future. Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that forces beyond General Howard were orchestrating events. Her grounding had been processed too quickly, her replacement assignment delayed indefinitely, and now she was being summoned to communications during what should have been her administrative processing time. Someone wanted her available but powerless. grounded but not transferred. The question was what they were preparing her for, and whether she'd survive it. The communications center occupied a hardened bunker beneath the main operations building, its concrete walls lined with radio equipment that never seemed to stop chattering. Sergeant First Class Emma Cole sat at the primary console, her headset pressed tight against her ears as she worked to isolate a weak signal from background static. Captain Stewart reporting as ordered, Rachel announced to Lieutenant Karen Hunt. The intelligence officer monitoring incoming reports, Hunt, looked up from her computer screen, her expression troubled. "We've got a team in contact. Sector 77 Charlie. SEAL Reconnaissance Patrol. 6 personnel engaged with Superior. Enemy forces." Rachel felt her pulse quicken. Sector 77 Charlie was bad country, a network of narrow canyons and steep ridges that offered perfect terrain for ambushes. Radio signals bounced unpredictably off the canyon walls, making communication spotty at best. Most pilots avoided the area unless absolutely necessary. Requesting immediate close air support, Hunt continued. "But we've got a problem." Rachel waited for the other shoe to drop, knowing it would be heavy. Weather's closing in fast. Ceiling dropping, visibility deteriorating. By the time we scramble conventional assets, conditions will be below minimums for safe operation. Cole suddenly straightened in her chair, pressing her headset tighter. Her face went pale as she listened to whatever was coming through the static. She looked up at Hunt with the expression of someone who just heard a death sentence pronounced. "Ma'am, I'm losing the signal. Team leader reports they're surrounded, taking casualties." And Cole's voice trailed off as the radio dissolved into white noise. Hunt grabbed the handset. "Bravo 7, this is base control. Do you copy?" Nothing but static answered. "Bravo 7, please respond." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Rachel knew what it meant. In the mountains of Afghanistan, lost communication usually meant lost lives. Without air support, a surrounded SEAL team had 2 options: fight their way out or die trying. "What aircraft do we have available?" Rachel asked, though she already suspected the answer. Hunt checked her status board. 2 Apache gunships, but they're weathered in a Bagram. F-16 Squadron is tasked with convoy support near Helmand. Closest available close air support is 90 minutes out, assuming weather doesn't deteriorate further. Rachel did the math in her head. 90 minutes was a lifetime in combat, a surrounded team burning through ammunition while enemy reinforcements closed in from all directions. She'd seen the aftermath of similar situations, body bags and casualty reports that followed when help arrived too late. "There's one option," she said quietly. Hunt raised an eyebrow. "Captain, you're grounded. The aircraft isn't." The intelligence officer stared at Rachel for a long moment, weighing regulations against reality. In the military, following orders kept you out of trouble, but sometimes breaking orders kept people alive. Cole's voice cut through their silent standoff. "Ma'am, I'm getting something." She adjusted her controls, trying to filter signal from noise. A burst of static emerged from the speakers, followed by a voice so weak it barely qualified as human. "Anyone ... Bravo 7. We're finished." The transmission dissolved back into white noise, leaving the 3 women staring at each other in the bunker's artificial light. Somewhere in the mountains, 6 SEALs were fighting for their lives with no hope of rescue. Weather was too bad. For conventional aircraft, regulations prohibited unauthorized missions, and time was running out like sand through an hourglass. Rachel turned toward the door without another word. She had a choice to make, and choices like this didn't improve with time. Behind her, she heard Hunt quietly tell Cole to maintain radio watch for any further transmissions from Bravo 7. The walk back to hangar, Foxtrot felt longer than usual, each step carrying the weight of what she was contemplating. Breaking orders again would end her career permanently. There would be no review board, no second chances, no possibility of redemption. But careers were temporary things, while lives were irreplaceable. This was her breaking point. The moment when following regulations meant abandoning American warriors to die in a canyon while bureaucrats worried about paperwork. Rachel had sworn an oath to support and defend, and that oath didn't include fine print about authorization codes and flight schedules. 6. SEALs were counting on someone to care more about their lives than about regulations. Rachel intended to be that someone, even if it destroyed everything she'd worked for. The decision crystallized with the finality of a cell door closing. Her military career was already over. Howard had made that clear. But she could still save 6 lives before they drummed her out of the service. Griffin looked up as Rachel entered the hangar. The master sergeant's experienced eye reading expressions like weather patterns. Whatever she saw on Rachel's face made her set down her tools and pay attention. Crew, how long to get 7-4 ready for immediate launch? Griffin's eyes narrowed. Captain, you're not supposed to. How long? Butler emerged from his workstation, wiping his hands on a clean rag. Birds fueled and armed from this morning's canceled mission. Pre-flight's current. Systems are green. She could be airborne in 15 minutes. Rachel nodded, her decision crystallizing with the finality of stepping off a cliff. Then let's get her ready. Griffin stepped closer, lowering her voice. Rachel, they'll throw the book at you. Court-martial, prison time, dishonorable discharge. Your flying days will be over. They're already over, Rachel replied. Question is whether 6 good men die because I was too worried about regulations to do my job. The master sergeant studied Rachel's face for several heartbeats, then nodded once. Butler, prep the bird. Full combat load, maximum fuel. Captain Stewart is going flying. As the ground crew moved with practiced efficiency around her aircraft, Rachel headed toward the pilot equipment room to gear up. Each piece of equipment, flight suit, survival vest, helmet, oxygen mask, felt heavier than usual, weighted with knowledge that this might be the last time she'd ever put them on. Outside the hangar, storm clouds were building against the mountain peaks, their dark mass promising the kind of weather that turned routine flights into survival exercises. Rachel checked her watch. The SEALs had been out of contact for 12 minutes. In the narrow canyons of Sector 77 Charlie, 12 minutes could mean the difference between rescue and recovery. She strapped herself into the A-10's cockpit with methodical precision of someone who'd performed this ritual hundreds of times. Each switch, each gauge, each control surface responded exactly as expected. The aircraft might be scarred and patched, but it was still fundamentally sound, still capable of delivering devastating close air support. The twin turbofan engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, vibrating through the airframe like a giant tuning fork. Rachel ran through her pre-flight checks one final time, knowing that any mechanical failure in the mountains would likely be fatal for both her and the trapped SEALs. Tower, Thunderbolt 724 requesting immediate takeoff. Emergency. Departure. Captain Kevin Barnes's voice crackled through her headset. 7-4, you're not on today's flight schedule. Please state the nature of your emergency. Rachel keyed her microphone. Bravo 7 is in contact and requesting immediate close air support. I'm responding. A long pause followed, filled only by the sound of her engines and distant rumble of thunder from the approaching storm. Barnes was undoubtedly checking his computer, seeing her grounded status, weighing his own career against the lives of 6 SEALs. 7-4, you are cleared for immediate takeoff. Winds 270 at 15, gusts to 25. Weather deteriorating rapidly to the north. Rachel released her brakes and rolled toward the active runway. Behind her, Hangar Foxtrot grew smaller in her mirrors, along with the live sheet. known for the past 8 years. Ahead lay the mountains, the storm, and 6 men who were counting on someone to care more about their lives than about regulations. But as she lifted off into air thick with dust and uncertainty, Rachel felt something she hadn't experienced since Howard's disciplinary hearing. Hope. She was flying again, doing what she'd been trained to do, following her conscience instead of bureaucratic cowardice. The A-10 settled into its element, transforming from earthbound beast to airborne predator. Below her, Kandahar airfield shrank to insignificant rectangles against the vast brown expanse of Afghan terrain. She banked northeast toward the mountains, climbing through scattered clouds that grew darker and more menacing with each passing minute. Her radar altimeter showed ground rising steadily beneath her, flat desert giving way to foothills that would soon become knife-edge ridges of the Hindu Kush. This was her fight back, not with lawyers or appeals or political maneuvering, but with the one weapon she understood: her aircraft and her willingness to risk everything for American lives. Rachel flew through the mouth of the canyon at 800 feet above ground level, her aircraft bucking and rolling in turbulent air. The narrow valley stretched ahead like a crack in the earth, its walls rising steeply until they disappeared into low-hanging clouds. Bravo 7, Thunderbolt 724 overhead, your last known position. If you can hear this transmission, pop smoke or signal your location. Nothing but static answered. She banked left, following the valley floor contours while searching for any sign of the missing SEAL team. Through her thermal imaging system, she painted the terrain in shades of green and amber, highlighting heat sources that could be anything from sun-warmed rocks to enemy fighters. A glint of reflected light caught her attention, sunlight bouncing off metal somewhere in the rocks below. Rachel banked toward the reflection, dropping another 100 feet as she tried to identify its source. Movement erupted from multiple positions as muzzle flashes lit up the valley floor like deadly fireflies. Green tracer rounds arced toward her aircraft in streams of light, several impacting her port wing with metallic clangs she felt through the flight controls. Taking fire from confirmed hostile forces, she transmitted, arming her cannon. The massive 7-barrel rotary gun was capable of firing depleted uranium rounds at 3,900 rounds per minute, devastatingly effective against infantry. In the open, Rachel rolled inverted and pulled through a diving attack, lining up on the largest concentration of muzzle flashes. The cannon roared to life with a sound like industrial machinery possessed by demons, its rounds impacting among the rocks with explosive flashes that lit up the valley floor. Several thermal signatures disappeared while others scattered for deeper cover. She pulled up hard, climbing back to safe altitude while assessing damage. Below her, the enemy's sophisticated response revealed this wasn't a chance encounter. Someone had planned this ambush with detailed knowledge of American rescue. Procedures. Her radio crackled with a weak signal that made her heart race with relief. Thunderbolt 724, this is Bravo 7 actual, came Staff Sergeant David Evans's voice, tight with pain and exhaustion. We are in a cave, approximately 200 meters north of your target area. 6 personnel, 1 urgent surgical, taking fire from multiple directions. Bravo 7 actual, copy your transmission. Can you mark your position with smoke or visual signal? Negative on smoke. We're in a defensive position and cannot risk giving away our exact location to enemy forces. Be advised, we have enemy reinforcements moving up the valley from the south. Rachel checked her fuel gauge and weapon status. She had approximately 40 minutes of flight time remaining and 3/4 of her cannon ammunition. Not much time to break up a coordinated enemy attack and provide cover for an evacuation that hadn't even been planned yet. But as she began her systematic attack on enemy positions, Rachel's radio exploded with an unexpected transmission that made her blood run cold. Thunderbolt 7-4. This is Overlord Actual. You are ordered to return to base immediately. She recognized Colonel Susan Pierce's voice calling from Kandahar Airfield. Somehow, word of her unauthorized mission had reached the highest levels of command. Overlord Actual, I have personnel in contact requiring immediate close air support. Unable to comply with return order at this time. Thunderbolt 7-4. You are in violation of direct orders and flying an aircraft not cleared for combat operations. Return to base immediately or face court-martial proceedings. Rachel could picture Pierce in the base operations center, surrounded by staff officers and communication equipment, trying to manage a situation that had spiraled beyond anyone's control. The colonel was probably facing pressure from her own superiors to resolve this crisis quickly and quietly. Overlord, I understand the consequences of my actions. Bravo 7 has wounded personnel and is surrounded by superior enemy forces. I will not abandon American personnel in contact. A different voice cut into the radio frequency, one that made Rachel's determination waver slightly. Captain Stewart, this is General Howard. You will comply with the return order immediately. That is a direct command from a superior officer. General. Howard's involvement meant this situation had reached Pentagon level. Politicians and senior officers were undoubtedly watching the mission unfold in real time, weighing political ramifications of an unauthorized rescue operation against the lives of 6 Navy SEALs. Rachel reached up and switched off her radio. The silence in her cockpit was profound, broken only by wind rushing through bullet holes in her canopy and the irregular rhythm of her damaged engines. She had just committed career suicide, but 6 men on the ground were depending on her. The downfall of her military life was accelerating, but so was her determination to complete this mission. The storm struck without warning, transforming the treacherous canyon into a meteorological nightmare. Rachel found herself flying through walls of rain that hammered her canopy like machine gun fire, visibility dropping to near zero as the world outside became a gray curtain of water and wind. Lightning forked across the sky in brilliant blue-white veins, close enough that she could smell ozone through her oxygen system. Each thunder crack shook her aircraft like a giant's fist, rattling instruments and making her teeth ache. But the weather provided unexpected cover for her final attack. Enemy positions that had been coordinating their fire were now forced to seek shelter, giving her an opportunity to get closer to the SEAL team's position. Bravo 7, I'm showing battle damage and may have to break off soon. What's your status on evacuation? Evans keyed his radio, his voice strained. No evacuation plan yet. We're still surrounded and taking fire. 1 man critical. Rachel checked her fuel gauge. 18 minutes of flight time remaining, possibly less with the fuel leak from battle damage. Not enough time to wait for conventional rescue forces. And the weather was continuing to deteriorate. Through the storm, she spotted something that changed everything. A narrow side canyon approximately 2 kilometers from the SEAL's position. That contained what appeared to be an abandoned mining operation. Flat ground, partially sheltered from weather, and most importantly, large enough to land an aircraft. Bravo 7, I've located a potential extraction site approximately 2 clicks southwest of your position. I'm going to attempt a landing and provide ground support. The transmission that followed made her realize the true scope of what they were facing. Thunderbolt 7-4. This is Colonel James Matthews. I'm coordinating extraction operations from higher headquarters. We have helicopters inbound, but need you to maintain your current position until they arrive. Something about Matthews's voice triggered a memory. She'd heard that same tone and cadence before, but couldn't place where. More importantly, his sudden appearance in their radio frequency suggested someone was monitoring their communications. Who shouldn't have access? Colonel Matthews, what's your authentication code? Rachel asked, following basic communication security protocols. A pause followed that lasted several seconds too long. "Authentication is Papa 77 Delta," came the reply. Rachel had memorized all the current authentication codes as part of her mission planning. Papa 77 Delta had been compromised and changed 3 days ago. Either Matthews was working with outdated codes, or he wasn't who he claimed to be. "Bravo 7, be advised your extraction coordination may be compromised. I'm proceeding with ground support option." She lined up for her landing approach at the mining site, fighting to control her damaged aircraft in the violent weather. The Sierra. A 10 hit the rocky terrain hard, bounced once, then slid across the surface in a shower of sparks before coming to rest against a pile of mining equipment. Rachel kicked open her damaged canopy and rolled out with her survival rifle just as the first SEAL team members reached the extraction site. "Welcome to the party," Evans shouted over approaching enemy fire. "Hope you brought extra ammunition." But their brief moment of optimism evaporated as helicopters appeared through the storm. Not American rescue aircraft, but enemy helicopters. That had obviously been coordinated through the compromised communications. The climax was upon them. A handful of Americans trapped at an abandoned mining site, surrounded by enemy forces that had been guided by intelligence from within their own command structure. Rachel checked her survival rifle and looked at Evans with grim determination. "Staff Sergeant, I think we've been set up." "Roger that, Captain." "Question is, who's running the setup and how do we get out of it?" As enemy forces closed in from multiple directions and the storm raged overhead, Rachel realized they were fighting not just for their lives, but against a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of American military command. The firefight at the mining site lasted 3 hours, with Rachel and the SEALs holding defensive positions against overwhelming odds. But their salvation came from an unexpected source. Major Lisa Parker, leading a flight of Apache gunships that had ignored direct orders to break off their rescue mission. "No pilot gets left behind," Parker transmitted as her helicopters unleashed devastating firepower on the enemy positions. "Not on my watch." The Apaches systematically eliminated the enemy forces while a Chinook transport helicopter braved the storm to extract the surrounded Americans. As they lifted off from the mining site, Rachel watched the abandoned equipment disappear into gray clouds below. But the mission's aftermath revealed something far more disturbing than a simple enemy ambush. Colonel Pierce was waiting when they landed at Kandahar Airfield, accompanied by federal investigators and intelligence officers, whose presence suggested the situation had escalated beyond a case of military insubordination. "Captain Stewart," Pierce said as Rachel climbed down from the helicopter, "we need to discuss what you discovered during your unauthorized mission." Agent Diana Foster from the Defense Intelligence Agency led the debriefing in a secure facility. Her questions focused on the communications intercepts and coordination patterns Rachel had observed. "Colonel Matthews has been under investigation for the past 6 months, Foster explained. "Your mission provided the evidence we needed to confirm he was passing intelligence to enemy forces." The scope of Matthews's betrayal was staggering. For 2 years, he'd been feeding operational plans, patrol routes, and mission timing to enemy forces, resulting in countless American casualties. The unauthorized rescue mission had been allowed to proceed because investigators hoped it would expose his network. "You were bait," Foster said bluntly. "We suspected Matthews would try to eliminate you as a witness, and we were prepared to intervene when he made his move." Rachel felt sick as she realized she'd been manipulated by both sides, used by Matthews as a target for elimination, and by American intelligence as a way to gather evidence of his treason. "What happens to the SEALs I extracted?" she asked. "They're receiving medical treatment and will make full recoveries. Your actions saved 6 American lives and helped expose the most damaging intelligence leak in recent military history." General Howard entered the briefing room, his expression thoughtful as he studied Rachel's battered appearance and obvious exhaustion. "Captain Stewart, you violated direct orders, endangered American personnel, and conducted multiple unauthorized operations," Howard said formally. Rachel straightened to attention, ready to face whatever consequences awaited her. "Yes, sir." Howard was silent for several seconds, apparently weighing the balance between military discipline and exceptional results. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of grudging respect. "You also saved 6 American lives, exposed a major security breach, and helped apprehend a traitor whose activities were responsible for numerous American casualties." He paused, studying her face. "How do you think we should resolve this contradiction?" Rachel met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I followed my oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I'd make the same decisions again." Howard nodded slowly. "Captain Stewart, you're hereby reinstated to full flying status. Your aircraft will be repaired and returned to service, and you'll resume normal squadron duties effective immediately." Relief flooded through Rachel as she realized her military career had survived the investigation. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet, Captain. You're also being recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross for your actions during the rescue mission." 6 months later, Rachel stood on the flight line at Kandahar Airfield, watching her repaired A-10 Thunderbolt being prepared for another mission. The aircraft bore new scars from recent operations, but it flew as well as ever, a testament to the skill of maintainers like Griffin and Butler. Staff Sergeant David Evans approached from the operations building, walking without the limp that had marked his first weeks after the canyon rescue. The SEAL team had returned to full duty, their injuries healed and their unit intact. "Captain Stewart," Evans said, offering his hand. "Wanted to thank you again before we rotate back to the States." "Just doing my job, Staff Sergeant." "No, ma'am, you did a lot more than that." His expression became serious. "We heard about the investigation, about Matthews and his network. Knowing that someone was selling us out to the enemy, it explains a lot of operations that went wrong over the past 2 years." Rachel nodded. Matthews' court-martial had revealed the extent of his treachery. Dozens of compromised missions, hundreds of American casualties that could have been prevented if his intelligence leaks had been detected sooner. "Any word on his sentencing?" Evans asked. "Life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. His handlers were captured during raids based on intelligence gathered from his communications intercepts." Evans smiled with grim satisfaction. "Good. That bastard had American blood on his hands." Colonel Pierce emerged from the operations building, carrying a folder that Rachel recognized as mission orders. The base commander had become a trusted ally during the investigation, her support crucial in ensuring Rachel's career survived the unauthorized rescue mission. "Captain Stewart, ready for another flight?" Rachel looked at her aircraft, then at the mountains where American forces continued their dangerous work of hunting terrorists and protecting Afghan civilians. The war wasn't over, but it was being fought without the handicap of compromised intelligence. "Yes, ma'am. Where are we going?" "Sector 77, Charlie. Army Patrol is requesting close air support for a clearing operation. Seems appropriate that you handle this one." Rachel smiled as she walked toward her aircraft. Returning to the canyon where everything had started felt like closing a circle. But this time, she was flying with proper authorization, clear conscience, and the knowledge that her communications weren't being monitored by traitors. Master Sergeant Griffin met her at the aircraft, holding a helmet that gleamed with fresh paint. "Thought you might want this," Griffin said, handing over the helmet. Painted on its side was a small inscription, "For those who can't come home." Rachel accepted the helmet with the respect it deserved. 6 words that captured everything she believed about military service. the obligation to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, whether they were SEALs trapped in a canyon or soldiers betrayed by their own command structure. As she strapped into the cockpit and began her pre-flight checks, Rachel reflected on the lessons learned during her unauthorized mission. Sometimes following orders meant abandoning your principles. Sometimes breaking regulations was the only way to honor your oath. And sometimes the most important victories weren't won in the air, but in the decision to do what was right regardless of consequences. The A-10 lifted off into clear Afghan sky, climbing toward mountains that no longer seemed quite as threatening. Below her, American forces operated with the confidence that their plans were secure and their sacrifices honored by people who understood the true meaning of military service. In her earpiece, she heard the familiar voice of the ground controller, directing her toward the patrol that needed support. Clear communication, proper authentication codes, and the knowledge that everyone involved was fighting for the same cause. Rachel banked toward Sector 77 Charlie, ready to provide close air support for Americans who deserve nothing less than her absolute best effort. Because sometimes the most important thing a pilot could do wasn't follow orders. It was follow conscience. And her conscience was clear. The war in Afghanistan would continue, but it would continue without the traitor who had been feeding intelligence to the enemy. American forces would operate knowing their plans were secure and their sacrifices honored. In Hangar Foxtrot, other A-10 Thunderbolts waited for their own missions, ready to carry pilots into whatever dangers lay ahead. Because sometimes the most important victories weren't won by following orders. They were won by following your oath to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Rachel Stewart had learned that lesson in a canyon, where 6 SEALs had transmitted their last words. "We're finished." But they weren't finished. None of them were. As long as there were pilots willing to risk everything for American lives, the mission would continue. And that was enough. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.